This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hello everyone, I'm Nita Hone, and it is Wednesday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. This is a series where I look back at Magic's history and talk about the cards that have performed the best at Magic's highest competitive level. This time around, I'm taking a look at Tutors. Tutors get their name from Demonic Tutor, a card from Magic's very first set that allowed you to search your library for any other card and put it into your hand. Tutors allow your decks to be super consistent, because if you're running 4 of something like Demonic Tutor, for 2 mana you get to search your library for whatever card in your deck is best at that exact moment, and it basically provides extra copies of those cards. Obviously, that is stupid powerful, and other tutors would really only pale in comparison to Demonic Tutor, either costing way more mana, only being able to search your library for specific card types, or making you jump through hoops to search for whatever you want. Other cards have had Tutor in their name over the years, like Enlightened Tutor, which puts a card on top of your library instead of into your hand, so that type of effect qualifies as a tutor as well. You also commonly hear people refer to cards like Entomb and Natural Order as tutors, so I think we should also think of cards that let you put a card from your library into your graveyard, or from your library into play as tutors too. So how am I defining tutor for this video? Well, it's a card that lets you search your library for a card or cards and put it into your hand, graveyard, on top of your library, or onto the battlefield. The one type of card that technically fits this that I did not include in this was cards that can only search your library for basic lands or lands of a specific type. Those types of effects are very commonplace and restrictive, and thus don't really feel like tutors. Plus, the ones that put them into play are just called ramp spells, and I've already done a top 10 on them. So, while cards that search your library for a basic land are excluded, it is important to note cards that can search for any land are eligible for this list. Before we get into this list, a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. Pro Tour and Mythic Championship top 8s, as well as Legacy and Vintage Championship top 8s are worth 2 points, and a Grand Prix top 8 is worth 1 point. Now, let's get to number 10. At number 10, we have the newest card to make the list, Traverse the Ulvenwald. So, in its base form, Traverse the Ulvenwald would not qualify for this list because it can only search your library for a basic land. However, it also has Delirium, which turns it into quite a powerful tutor. If you can get Delirium, you're able to search your library for any land, including non-basic ones, or you can also grab a creature. This is a nice card because even if you don't have Delirium, it lets you search your library for any basic land, while also helping fill up your graveyard since it goes there right away, and obviously, most decks this is in like filling up the graveyard. Once you have Delirium, it becomes absolutely incredible. It saw a lot of play in Standard, being played in lots of Golgari decks, including the more graveyard-heavy Golgari Delirium deck, as well as decks that had more of a graveyard sub-theme like Golgari Constrictor. In the latter, it could help you search up the namesake of the deck, Winding Constrictor, and that was pretty great. It was also played in Modern for a while, in the Death Shadow variant commonly called Traverse Shadow. This was a Jund deck built around rapidly lowering your life and winning with a huge Death Shadow, which of course, the Traverse could help you search for. Death Shadow decks these days in Modern have moved away from this model, but it was pretty successful there between 2016 and 2018. While it hasn't put up any points since 2018, I think we can expect Traverse the Ulvenwald to put up points again in some format going forward, whether Modern or Pioneer. At number 9, it's Merchant Scroll. This serves as a good illustration of how much better Demonic Tutor is than all other tutors. Merchant Scroll, like Demonic Tutor, is a sorcery, and it costs the same amount of mana, and it can put a card from your deck into your hand, but that card has to both be blue and an instant. That's way more restrictive than Demonic Tutor, and yet it's still a super powerful card that has been relevant in Magic for a very long time. It was played first in extended High Tide decks. These decks were, obviously, built around the mana ramp instant High Tide, and if you ran 4 Merchant Scrolls, you effectively had 8 copies of the key card for your deck, and that's definitely a good thing. It did the same thing in Legacy High Tide decks. In Vintage, it could search up not only High Tide, but also Ancestral Recall, and in 2008 it was restricted in Vintage for making combo decks too consistent. It's still restricted in Vintage today, but it is regularly played as a singleton copy in multiple decks in Vintage, including Paradoxical Outcome combo decks, where it can serve as a 5th copy of the important instant. At number 8, it is Primeval Titan, which is certainly the most imposing tutor to make this list, as a 6-mana 6/6 with Trample. But in addition to his size, the Titan lets you tutor up any land in your deck, including non-basic ones, and he lets you do it every time he attacks, and he puts them into play. The fact he can get whatever lands he wants has been crucial to making him so good over the years. He just gives you a ton of mana and can grab any useful utility lands you might need. In Standard, the Titan would regularly search up Kessig Wolfrun and Inkmoth Nexus, which just so happen to work stupid well together. In Modern, he has been used to search up Valakut to do massive amounts of damage, and he is also combined with Sunhome Fortress of the Legion and Slayer's Stronghold to swing for near lethal almost immediately. That is, of course, in addition to being combined with Amulet of Vigor and Karoo lands to produce a ton of mana. Primeval Titan is one of the key cards in Modern these days, and that doesn't look like it will change anytime soon. At number 7, it's Chord of Calling. So yeah, 3 of the 4 tutors we've looked at so far are green. While black is the best color at tutoring, since it has ways to tutor for whatever it wants, green is pretty great at tutoring up creatures and lands, and Chord of Calling is a good example of the former, since it lets you search up your library for a creature with converted mana cost X. Adding Convoke to the mix means that you can power out some scary stuff early on with Chord of Calling. While it didn't do much in Standard, it did find success in Extended, in particular in an elf combo deck that used a bunch of cheap mana elves and Glimpse of Nature to rip through a bunch of your library. Then, when you could, you would cast Chord of Calling to search up Predator Dragon and win on the spot. In Modern, Glimpse of Nature was banned from the beginning to keep that deck from being a thing, but Chord of Calling has been a fixture in Modern anyway. In Modern, it is used as a way to more consistently assemble creature-based combos, like Melira Silvok Outcast and Murderous Redcap, plus a Sacrifice outlet, and it is also used as a way to search up toolbox creatures, which are singleton creatures you have in your deck who are particularly good in some matchups, so being able to search one of them up at will is pretty powerful. It hasn't managed any points in 2019, but I don't imagine Chord of Calling is done just yet. At number 6, it's Mystical Tutor. It's one of those tutors that can only put a card on top of your library instead of into your hand. It has 57 points, which is the same as Chord of Calling, but I gave it the edge because of more Pro Tour top 8s, or really in this case, Vintage Championship top 8s. Obviously, this type of tutor is inherently weaker than those that put cards into your hand or onto the battlefield because technically it's card disadvantage. You give up a card and you never get that full card back. But you get to know what the next card you draw is going to be, and you get to make it whatever is the best instant or sorcery from your deck. Mystical Tutor has the distinction of being played in what is arguably Magic's first combo deck ever, Prosperous Bloom, a Mirage block constructed deck that sought to use Cadaverous Bloom and squandered resources, as well as card draw spells, to produce stupid amounts of mana, and then cast a lethal Drain Life. The deck only ran 1 or 2 copies of Drain Life because you didn't really want to draw it when you could be drawing more lands or card draw spells, and you could use the tutor to grab it once you had the mana you needed. In Standard, it was played in some Replenish combo decks because, like a lot of tutors, it could serve as additional copies of the deck's key card. In Extended, it was used alongside Merchant Scroll to search up High Tide, meaning you had even more than 8 copies of the card in your deck, effectively. It was also used in a combo deck that used Mana Severance to get rid of all your lands and then activate Goblin Charbelcher for lethal. In Legacy, it has been used in other combo decks built around instants or sorceries, like those interested in using Flash or Ad Nauseam. In Vintage, it's capable of searching up pieces of the Power 9, like Time Walk and Ancestral Recall, as well as Time Twister, not to mention cards with Storm in Storm decks. Mystical Tutor is still actively gaining points, and it isn't going to stop anytime soon. At number 5, I have Ranger of Eos. The Ranger searches you up 2 creatures with a converted mana cost of 1, which is pretty great because it means you're probably going to get at least a 3-for-1 out of Ranger of Eos. It's a nice card at the top of the curve in aggro decks, since aggro decks can sometimes run out of gas late and you make sure that you're going to keep things rolling. You might be thinking, what's so scary about 1-mana creatures? But in addition to the nice value he can give you, the Ranger can also grab some pretty spicy targets in most formats. In Standard, he could grab Figure of Destiny, and he could also grab a toolbox card like Burrenton Forge Tender. In Extended, he could grab Wild Nacatl, and in Modern, he has been used to search up key cards in life gain decks like Martyr of Sands. More recently in Modern, he's been featured in some versions of Death's Shadow, where you can search up the eponymous creature. At number 4, I have Knight of the Reliquary. This is one that I considered excluding because a lot of the time, Knight of the Reliquary's ability to tutor for any land isn't all that relevant. Of all the cards that made this list, it's the one whose value is least focused upon its ability to tutor things up. But in the end, I decided to include it. Frequently, the Knight is just a huge creature, or it combines with landfall effects to untap infinitely in combo decks, but I decided in the end that most of the decks also happen to run a few toolbox lands that the Knight can grab in a pinch, and that's enough for me. In Standard, it was mostly played in aggro decks, and these aggro decks would run singleton copies of things like Sajiri's Step, which could be particularly useful on the right board to help you push through lethal, or Tectonic Edge, which could blow up a problem non-basic land. In Extended, it was played in Life from the Loam decks, a deck already very interested in toolbox lands, and it could grab you singleton copies of things like Treetop Village, which it felt pretty good to search up in response to a removal spell or board sweeper. In Modern, where it is featured in collected company decks these days, it can search you up a Field of Ruin when you really need it. And in Legacy, it's most played in Junk and Maverick, where it can be used to search up Karakas and Bajuka Bog when those might be useful. In the end, the ability to grab useful utility lands is an important part of the Knight's game, even if it isn't quite as central to its power as most of the other cards on this list. At number 3, it's Vampiric Tutor. This is another tutor that puts the card on top of your library instead of giving you the card right away in one way or another. When it was printed, it was intended to be a fixed demonic tutor, and it is certainly worse than the original tutor. Even though it costs half the mana, paying life and not getting the card right away is significantly worse. However, even if it is worse than demonic tutor, it's still insanely powerful. 1 mana to get anything in your deck is pretty serious. In Mirage Block, it was played in Prosperous Bloom alongside Mystical Tutor, meaning that the deck could search up whatever it wanted, making that combo deck a bit too good. It was also played in Standard, where the ideal card to search up was Yawgmoth's Will, an insane combo engine. By 1999, the prevalence of so many powerful tutors became a problem, especially in the Eternal formats, creating what is commonly known as Combo Winter. All these tutors made it way too easy to build good combo decks, and Vampiric Tutor was banned in Legacy and restricted in Vintage. It did remain legal in Extended, though, where it was used in Reanimator decks to find reanimation spells, and in various other combo decks. It still sees a ton of play in Vintage today, despite being restricted, appearing in all kinds of black decks, since it is so good at finding whatever card you need at the moment. At number 2, it's Stoneforge Mystic, a creature who can tutor up equipment, and then can also help you put it into play at a discount. While it can only tutor equipment, and that might seem a little restrictive based on what we've seen so far, the fact that it can put equipment into play at instant speed and at a discount has made it incredibly powerful over the years. It also helps that there is tons of powerful equipment in this game. In general, a 2-mana 1/2 that draws you one of the best cards in your deck every time you play it is very powerful, and that's what Stoneforge Mystic is. The Mystic was a key card in many Standard decks, many of which ended up with Blade in their name because the deck could run swords like Sword of Feast and Famine, which could be found by the Mystic. Despite the name, the deck more frequently searched up Batterskull, which isn't a Blade at all, since getting it into play on turn 3 was a hard thing for opponents to contend with. The most famous of these decks was Cawblade, a deck so dominant that it eventually got Stoneforge Mystic banned in Standard. No matter the format for Stoneforge Mystic, and it sees play in Modern, Legacy, and Vintage these days, the Mystic most frequently finds itself searching up a sword, like Feast and Famine, or Batterskull. While it was banned in Modern for 8 years, it was unbanned recently, and is seeing lots of play there now, both searching up powerful equipment to put on creatures, and Sword of the Meek to enable the Thopter Foundry Sword of the Meek combo. Stoneforge Mystic is rapidly adding to its score, and I think there's some chance that it catches the number 1 card on this list, since it is seeing play just about everywhere it possibly can. But for now, the number 1 card on this list is Demonic Tutor, which probably doesn't come as much of a surprise. The original Tutor is still the best one around. Getting any card from your deck to your hand for only 2 mana is incredible. So incredible that since day 1 of the banned and restricted list, January 1994, Demonic Tutor has been restricted. Back then, all that existed was what we would consider Standard now. At the time, there were no formats really, just Magic. But these days, it is only legal in Vintage, where it is only legal as a single copy. Any Vintage deck that runs black takes advantage of that single copy though, since it allows them, like all tutors, to search up the most powerful card in their deck for a given situation, and makes combo decks more consistent. Well, that does it for this MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you see future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to see the almost 250 other MTG Top 10s I've already made, you should see the playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.